Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stevenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. We're back once again with a new topic, a new guest, and a new voice of forestry. So before we kick off our discussion today on pollinators, we are getting into the spring summery time, so we thought it was appropriate to get pollinators here on the docket. Let me introduce my guest today, Leslie Cooper. She is the Arkansas Monarch and Pollinator Coordinator with Quail Forever. Leslie, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Seth. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Now, before we hop into, what exactly are pollinators and the details here, let's just kind of get a quick rundown of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. So, like I said, like you said, I'm the Arkansas Monarch and Pollinator Coordinator, which is quite the mouthful. But it's basically a partnership position with NRCS and Quail Forever. So part of my duties is, providing free technical assistance to landowners. And also, I'm the coordinator for the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership.
Okay. Now, the key word here, something that you mentioned, is free help to landowners, and we're gonna get back to this later, but I just want people to kind of hold on to that little nugget. Now, before we also kind of start into it, just you mentioned the Monarch Conservation Partnership. What exactly is that?
Yes. So the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership, or AMCP, is a collaborative of over 30, statewide partners that are working together to, put forth the strategic goals that are in the Arkansas Monarch and Pollinator Conservation Plan. So that is the statewide strategic plan. There are goals and objectives that are specifically outlined to benefit our monarch butterflies and native pollinators across the state and protect their habitats. And if people are interested, that plan is actually available on our website, arkansasmonarchs.org.
Okay, awesome. And we'll make sure to have a link to that too here in the description of this episode to make it super easy for you guys to access that if you're curious. So I guess let's hop into it real quick, and I'm sure we'll dip back into the conservation partnership here later on. But I guess we need to start at the basics, Leslie. Just explain to all of us here, what exactly are pollinators? Because I know the stereotype is people say pollinators and think immediately of bees, bumblebees, I guess, specifically. But what are pollinators?
So simply put, pollinators are really anything, because, bats, hummingbirds, bees, butterflies are all these things. But it basically is just something that transfers pollen from one part of one flower to another part of another flower so that they can reproduce essentially and set seed or fruit.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about a bunch of different critters that are very important to not only forest lands, but just all of our ecosystems here in Arkansas, right?
Oh, yeah. Pollinators are really kind of the fundamental building block that all of these ecosystems are built on. And they kind of are responsible for really the reproduction of about 80% of our native plant species.
Okay. Wow. That's crazy. So I guess you've kind of answered this, but maybe we can dive a little bit deeper here. You said that they help reproduce 80% of our native plants, but is that all they do? That sounds kind of mean as I say that, all they do, but I mean, that's very important. I mean, is that the major benefit to having pollinators, I guess, on your land or just in your area?
I suppose, that's all they do, but they, 1 in 3 bites of food comes from pollinators, and a lot of our, crops that we eat or utilize as a resource, even if they don't require insect pollination, they actually see higher crop yields. So they put on more fruit with the aid of insect pollinators. So really, it goes back to the human benefit and also the ecological benefit. Without pollinators, it's kind of like a world without insects, even though we kind of gripe about some of the pestier species. They're just so important that it would kind of be a barren wasteland without them.
So that native fruit of Arkansas that escapes me, whatever that may be, when you take a bite of that, there's a very solid chance that a pollinator helped make that come into existence.
100%. And I feel like, especially since we just kind of, I call it the pollinating, and all of these wind pollinated tree species just kind of dump pollen everywhere. And I know that those folks with allergies are not a big fan, but,
Yes.
don't blame the pollinators for these wind pollinated species. But yeah, it all just kind of comes back to the importance of these pollinators and creating habitat that supports them.
Okay. So now I feel even worse for saying, is that all they do? Like a kid who's not impressed, but I'm very much impressed, by these animals, and insects, actually, not just animals.
Well, I'm going to change your mind during this podcast.
Okay, good.
I promise you're going to be nerding out about native bees before this is all over, and I'm excited.
Awesome. Now, I guess one thing that I kind of want to ask, we talk a lot about forestry land here on this forestry educational podcast, but how exactly, how can someone attract a pollinator to their land? Like a landowner, if I'm a landowner and I want to make sure that I have pollinators, is there a certain way that I can do that, or do I just kind of hope that they are already there or show up, or what's the I guess route to making that happen?
Yeah, 100%. It all comes back to habitat. And the thing that I love most about, monarch and pollinator habitat is that it really goes with any management system, any forest system that, you're talking about. If you're, a landowner who is looking to benefit wildlife or at least incorporate this habitat into, your existing management plan, it goes really well anywhere, any typical mowed areas, if we wanted to thin and burn, if a landowner was interested in restoring those, native habitat types on their property, say, oak woodlands, pine savannas, any glades that they have on their property that have been overtaken by cedars, there's a lot of free resources available, and also some state and federal cost share programs that landowners can qualify for. And then they have these free biologists or foresters that help walk them through the process. And regardless of whether or not they decide to enroll in these cost share programs, they can still receive a free management plan or a free forestry plan, and it's really no cost to them.
So this is great, because we've talked about management plans a lot on this show and how very important they are to landowners and to making sure you are being an excellent steward of your land. So there's no specific pollinator plan that I have to have. This can go right into the wildlife plan that I may already have for my property.
Exactly. And the most important thing to remember, I talk about pollinator habitat being versatile. Sometimes in these degraded woodland sites, really just some of these less desirable tree species just need to be thinned out, or maybe a prescribed burn regime needs to be restored on the property. You may not have to seed it all, but it all comes back to native habitat and native plants, because the more diversity of native plants that we have, the greater diversity of pollinators and other beneficial insects that we can support on our private lands in Arkansas. And, over 80% of the state is privately owned. So I just cannot understate the importance of overstate, I guess, the importance of private landowners being stewards of the land to restore, native habitat for wildlife, pollinating insects, other beneficial insects, and a lot, kind of goes back to restoring healthy forests on the landscape.
And it all comes down, it sounds like, to that key of native plants. Arkansas native plants will attract the native pollinators to help bolster what you already have there on your property.
Oh yeah, 100%. And the thing that I think people don't really realize is that, just because you see a species commonly, in Arkansas, and you've seen it since, you were young, doesn't necessarily mean that the species is actually native to the state. So there's a lot of resources that you can, utilize to see if a plant's native. And Arkansas, things grow really well here. And that includes a lot of our invasive species, privet, oh my goodness. I mean, cedars technically they are native, so they're not by definition invasive. But cedars are in a lot of places where, you know, they really historically weren't. So they're kind of degrading these plant communities by outcompeting, just as a lot of our invasive species do. You know, Bradford and Callery pears, for example, are a real problem.
Yeah, and if you want more information, this is a perfect plug. Thank you, Leslie. If you want some more information, we actually did an episode on non-native species and invasive species way back. So check out our feed for an episode on that. It's a really good one, and it kind of helps further define what these plants or critters or animals are actually doing on your property if they are non-native. But after that quick little shameless plug, we're going to hop back here over to pollinators real quick. So Leslie, you keep mentioning that there are resources out there for people. And these are all, again, free resources for people who are curious, correct?
Oh yeah, it's just a matter of contacting the right people. And if people are, you know, interested or they're having any issues getting a hold of the correct person to get more information, you know, they're more than welcome to send me an email. That will be listed in the show description, but it's lcooper@quailforever.org. But in a nutshell, you know, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has private lands biologists. The Forestry Division has, you know, foresters. And Quail Forever, in fact, has farm bill biologists that are also available to write these forestry plans and conservation plans. And of course, you can always reach out to your local NRCS field office. And really, it's done, you know, you can find these resources with a quick Google search, but sometimes it's easier to get a hold of folks if you get a direct email instead of getting kind of passed from one person to the next if they don't know exactly what resources you're talking about.
And like Leslie said, we'll make sure to have her direct email if you have any pollinator specific questions in the description of this episode. But this is another thing that we kind of talk about and want to make sure that people really understand is that there are resources out there that are free. There's no like, you know, hey, come watch this free timeshare presentation, and then we really give you the hard sell. This is just a resource for you guys to benefit from and to help, again, become better stewards of the land.
Exactly. And another thing that I kind of forgot to mention, but there are a few that are established across the state. They're called prescribed burn associations. And basically the foundation of this concept is really neighbors helping neighbors. So we really want to restore, you know, a more historically accurate, you know, use of prescribed fire on the landscape, putting fire back on the ground, and the good kind of fire. And also the good kind of fire, prescribed fires, you know, done with a written management plan, really help reduce the fuel loads to reduce wildfire hazards. So if that's something that landowners are concerned in their, you know, forests, that's a great option. Arkansas Game and Fish Commission also has learn to burn courses, but if you're interested in starting or joining a prescribed burn association or a PBA in your area, we can definitely get those conversations started with the local biologists.
Okay, awesome. And I think this might be a good time actually to kind of backtrack a little to this conservation partnership that you discussed. You said this was a group of 30 different organizations. Is that right?
Yes, it's over 30. The exact number escapes me right now. I'm a bad coordinator. But, you know, we've just grown so rapidly, and we just have so many wonderful partners that we're working with. You know, they're federal and state organizations, academia, utility organizations, you know, agricultural stakeholders. You know, it's just kind of a great mix of people that have some buy-in for, you know, the monarch butterfly and our other native pollinators.
And why exactly did you guys want to create this partnership? What's the end goal for this group?
So to talk about the end goal, we really need to talk about kind of the beginning of it all. Okay. So everyone, if you're not familiar, over the last 2 decades, you know, the monarch butterfly population has really decreased over the last 2 decades. And, you know, kind of following this dip in the 2014 overwintering population census, if you will, a group got together in Arkansas. It was known as the first Monarch Summit. It was in 2015, and they got together and formed the steering committee. And the first goal for the steering committee was to finalize this statewide conservation plan. And although that the focus of the plan was to be the monarch butterfly, they found it really important to also include our other native pollinators. And the reason why this was important is because, monarch habitat doesn't have to be mutually exclusive from, say, pollinator habitat, or really even other, turkey brood rearing habitat that benefits bobwhite quail. As long as we're doing these native habitat restorations, we're benefiting a multitude of species. So, the end goal, there are several different, but I think that the most relevant for this podcast is going to be the habitat goals. So there's 3 distinct habitat goals. We have a goal for private lands, we have a goal for public lands, and we have a goal for public and private rights of way, which are kind of the roadsides underneath power transmission lines, natural gas pipelines, roadsides, etc. So it's all coming back to the habitat and how we can benefit that.
So if you didn't think pollinators were important up until now, which congratulations, you've made it about 15 minutes in and you still didn't think they were important, but if you needed more convincing, the fact that over 30 organizations got together and thought that this was something worth fighting for should say a lot right there. That, by helping these pollinators, you're helping just wildlife in general to make sure that they're thriving and which in turn make sure our land is thriving. That's a big deal, it seems like.
Oh, yeah. And this habitat, it has multiple benefits. I've mentioned several times that it benefits multiple species, but it also, increases water infiltration. It improves water quality. It decreases soil erosion and increases soil health. There's a lot of other benefits of, putting these native plants back on the landscape and managing your land, properly, that really goes beyond pollinators. So there's all these kind of extra benefits that you get from establishing this native habitat.
It's almost like a circle of something that I won't say in case we get trademark or copyright infringement, but I think most people will understand where I'm coming from here.
I know. And if you say it, then I'll have to start singing, and no one wants that recorded. So
awesome. Well, Leslie, I guess one last thing before we kind of start heading towards the end here. If I'm a landowner, is there a proper way for me to make sure I identify, or I'm able to identify if I have a pollinator on my property? Is there an easy way to do that? A lot of these boys are small.
I know. And that's kind of the cool thing. I get a lot of questions from, people that keep bees or anything like that. And I love honeybees. They're a very important agricultural crop pollinator. But really my focus is more on native bees. And, honeybees are more generalist pollinators, so that just kind of means that they'll just nectar on anything and collect pollen from a lot of different species, whereas a lot of our native bee species are specialists. So they typically only go for certain types of plants, and maybe even within like a 2-week window. So it's a lot more narrow. But if you're interested in kind of seeing if you have these native bees, is to look for the blooms. And, we missed it by a couple weeks, but when those red buds were blooming, I would take a peek and I saw, different bumblebees, a lot of other native bee species. I don't think that I've seen a leafcutter bee yet, but those are my favorite. But really, if you ever want to dive down kind of this information rabbit hole, I could not recommend enough, looking into the diversity of the native bee species that we have here in Arkansas. And anyway, so if you're interested in finding out if you have these species on your property already, go to the flowers and open your eyes and kind of look for movement. Once you know what a honeybee looks like, or what a bumblebee looks like, or even a carpenter bee, which is oftenly mistaken for bumblebees, but just look for their shiny abdomens. Shiny abdomens mean that they're a carpenter bee. And if they're all fuzzy all over and they're large, they're typically a bumblebee. So.
Okay. All right. So you just got to have an eagle eye almost out there on your property.
Oh, yes. And if you can, I got tired of chasing these bees with my phone, but I have this really fancy camera with a big lens. So I often stalk these flowers to look for these native bees. But, if you're curious, there's a lot of resources out there so that you can learn more about these really important, pollinators. And I feel like oftentimes, people, when they think about the plight of the pollinators, they know that pollinators are in trouble and they know that they want to do something to help. Immediately their minds either go to honeybees or to bumblebees. And there's 4,000 species of native bees across, North America. And people have no idea the diversity that we have just even in our own backyard.
And that's just talking about bees alone. I mean, like we've discussed earlier, there are different types of pollinators that extend well beyond the bee kingdom that are super beneficial to our ecosystem here.
Oh, yes. And see, I have a preference. Obviously, I get very excited when I get to talk about bees. And bees are the most efficient pollinator. But, monarch butterflies, other butterflies, moths, flies, beetles are a really important pollinator. And a lot of people get really excited about hummingbirds.
Oh, yeah.
So there are native plants that hummingbirds absolutely love, and you can definitely incorporate those onto your property as well.
Okay. All right. Now, one thing too, it's actually pollinator month next month. Is that correct?
Yes. June is a big month for us at the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership. We do this big rollout of kind of outreach. So June is pollinator month. So it's kind of just this awareness month that we get to celebrate. But there is 1 week in particular. So every single year, it's the 3rd week in June. And this year it falls on June 21st to June 27th. So if people are on social media or want to check out our website, we are just at Arkansas Monarchs on Facebook and Instagram. So we'll be putting out a lot of informational content on that. So, like, share, and subscribe, I guess. Is that the cool lingo that I'm supposed to use?
It's lingo for sure.
I know, lingo. So we're also on YouTube, and last year we held the 2020 Arkansas Monarch and Pollinator Forum. So we actually had a lot of great topics. In fact, we do have a recorded webinar for I think he called it like Pollinators in the Woods, and Austin Kleiss, one of our Quail Forever Farm Bill biologist, he actually did a presentation on that. So it's a recorded webinar. It's on our YouTube channel. There's just a lot of resources out there. So if people are even remotely curious and, they don't know what you don't know. So if people are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. Either via email or on our social media channels, and I'd be happy to provide you with just a slew of resources.
Yeah, if about 20-ish minutes of podcast wasn't enough for you on pollinators, we timed this perfectly with it being a whole month dedicated to these pollinators, and there's plenty of resources out there for you guys to dig into and learn a little bit more if you want to. So Leslie, is there anything else though that I may have forgotten to mention? Anything else you want to say or add before we kind of wrap this up?
I mean, if I haven't said it enough, I guess the only thing that I can really say is just put more native plants on the landscape, benefit these monarch butterflies, benefit the native bees. And really the only distinction, quote unquote, I talked about them not being mutually exclusive. I just realized we made it through an entire monarch podcast and I haven't mentioned milkweed.
Okay.
So make sure that you're including those native milkweed species. We have 21 native milkweed species in Arkansas. Some of them are viney. I actually have 6 Arkansas native milkweed species that are in terracotta pots in my rent house right now. So, just remember that you don't have to have large areas to create habitat. Bigger isn't always better. We just kind of need to use what we have. So plant those Arkansas native milkweed plants for monarch butterflies to use as their host plant. It's the only thing that their caterpillars will eat. And make sure that you include just a diversity of blooming species that cover the entire growing season. So, your local biologist will cover this. Typically, as a general rule of thumb, the absolute minimum is we want to have 3 native species blooming in each of the 3 seasons during the growing period. So spring, summer, and fall. So 3 in each. So an absolute minimum of 9 species. And the really important thing when you're planning this is to pay particular attention to those really early blooming species for our early emerging native bees and our migrating monarchs, and also late fall blooming plants. To, again, fuel the monarch migration and help our native bees that are preparing to overwinter. So, there's mowing guidelines, there's all these different things that are available to you if you're hoping to, manage better for pollinators. And even though it's an absolute minimum of 9 species, our real recommendation is to maximize the diversity. So if you don't have a degraded woodland site and say, you have something that doesn't have an existing seed bed, and if you don't know what that looks like, just reach out to your biologist. They can explain it in more detail. But a lot of the ecoregion seed mixes that our biologists have created have over 50 species. So that's a high diversity mix. That's less than like 12 grass species. So all of the rest of them are forb or wildflower species. So if you're interested in learning more about those seed mixes, again, shoot me an email.
Okay. All right. Well, Leslie, thank you again for joining us this month. We really appreciate it. And a lot to take away from this episode, especially if this is something that you've thought about or something that you may have heard about. So we just want to again thank you, Leslie, for stopping by.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited, and I hope that I change some people's minds. I hope that they think that, pollinators are important and they want to do their part and be great stewards of their forests, of great stewards of the land, so that we can, help conserve the monarch butterfly migration and also benefit our other native pollinators.
And it's interesting something you brought up too. If you're someone aspiring to be a forest landowner someday but aren't quite there just yet, you can go ahead and start doing this in your own backyard.
Oh, exactly. There's lots of resources for, conservation districts, school teachers, just master gardeners, master naturalists. I work with a lot of different folks. They're doing some non-traditional habitats, sometimes in urban areas, sometimes on roadsides. But really, if you want to do something, there's an opportunity somewhere for you to plug in.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Leslie, thank you again. And like we mentioned throughout this episode, if you check out the description of this episode, we will have links to the partnership. We'll have an email address for Leslie if you want to reach out to her for anything. So check that out for some links and some ways to get in contact with a couple folks. But like always, we want to give a shout out to Rob McCormick / some guy named Rob for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster, which you can find on Spotify along with more of his music. And we'll also, yes, you guessed it, another link will be in the description to his website if you want to check out more of his stuff. And if you want more information on the Arkansas Forestry Association, you can find us at arkforest.org. That's ARKFORESTS.org. Thank you guys for joining us this month. Come back again next month where we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.